As we approach 2,000 days since the Axanar settlement, and with no fan film in sight still, we begin a series of podcasts diving into the missed steps that foreshadow the supposed late 2022 release date. Today, one-time Axanar PR man Mike Bawden beams in.
This is a Trekzone conversation.
Mike, thanks for a little bit of your time to have a Trekzone conversation. It's been a long time since we've spoken.
No, it's good to see you, Matt.
Now, let's start in the very beginning. How did you get started as Axanar's PR man?
Well, so, I enjoy doing what I do. It's fun. I've done this my entire career. Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to work in advertising and marketing and public relations. Most kids want to be astronauts or firemen or whatever, and I wanted to be a creative director at an advertising agency. So, but that aside, prior to Axanar's kind of coming out party with the Kickstarter campaign for Prelude to Axanar, I had been helping Mark Zicree with Space Command. And I got onto that because I saw a sizzle reel that Doug Drexler had put together and, had always kind of admired Doug's work and, got to know Doug, got to know Tobias Richter, got to know a bunch of the guys, and actually worked directly with Mark and in managing that whole situation and sort of kind of the way that he was trying to get things pulled together. It was an interesting challenge in that, I live in the Midwest, in the Midwestern United States, and don't work in the entertainment business. So my focus has always been on marketing and that kind of thing. And so with Space Command, I got them into the Wall Street Journal. We got some really great press. I worked with a local PR person that Doug and Dorothy Drexler had set up. And the two of us got along great. We worked together. We worked Comic-Con. We did a bunch of stuff, made some great headway. But about the time that the Axanar Kickstarter started, I was pretty much done with helping Space Command. Mark had his own ideas as far as what he wanted to do. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Not a problem. I'll find another project. Tobias, I think, had sent me a link to the Prelude to Axanar Kickstarter. I saw that and I'm like, oh, this looks very cool. So the big problem I had when we were working on Space Command was that we had a really great sizzle reel and we had a great kind of high concept, but there was no script. And so, they raised all this money and then Mark wrote a script and the script Mark wrote was prohibitively expensive compared to the money that was raised. In the case of the Prelude to Axanar thing, what was presented? Well, we had Christian Gossett, who was a known commodity, and we had a franchise that already had some parameters around it. So there wasn't, from a production design standpoint, going to be quite the challenges that existed on the Space Command thing. And lo and behold, you took a look at the Prelude to Axanar thing, and then you finally saw when Prelude came out. I'm like, these guys already know what the story is. What an awesome way to do a proof of concept piece. This is just going to be completely amazing. I'm in. I'm happy to help out. I want to get to know these guys. I want to get to know who's involved. Tobias was involved on the effects side, so I knew that, and they had some good names. I mean, and from a talent standpoint, I'm like, yeah, these guys are like known actors. We aren't going to have to do a big talent search like we did with Space. I'm like, this is going to be great. So I offered to help. And again, it was one of those deals where the answer came back, yeah, sure, that's great. You do PR. We definitely could use that. And, because we need to raise more money. And I'm like, okay, not a problem. So we got things going. And I think it was, what was it? It was 2014, I think, when Prelude came out in right? Yeah.
Yep.
And in 2015, I had kind of like finally hit on all cylinders, and I was working with them. We were getting some really great press. We, ended up with some good hits and everything like that. Rob did the Vulcan scene. I'm trying to think how that all worked timing wise. But anyway, I ended up actually meeting Richard Hatch and meeting Alec Peters and shooting some interview footage with them and putting together a press website and all this other kind of stuff. And about September, I got wind that Tony Todd had left the production. And I'm like, oh, dude, that's pretty bad. We just had Admiral Ramirez leave. We need to let people know. And I was told, no, we don't need to do that. Don't worry. We'll do that when we announce the rest of the cast because we've figured out a workaround. It's not a big deal. I'm like, okay. And they said, and this was Rob and Alec were both saying like, yeah, no, we're meeting with talent. We're talking to some really amazing people. We've got people that were involved with Lord of the Rings that said that they're interested in doing it. We've got all this. We still have this really great cast and everything. And Tony just didn't understand what we're trying to do and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, but what you really need to do is make sure that you maintain ongoing conversation with people and let them know what's going on. And I was assured that not to worry about it. Well, the casting never happened. We were always like 30 days out from the start of production. And I kept asking more questions. And finally on New Year's Eve, I think, of that year, I get this urgent phone call saying like, you're not going to believe this. We're being sued by CBS and Paramount. And I'm like, what? I said, we? It's like, how am I getting sued by? No, not. But it's Axanar Productions and Alec, and they've named all these John Does, and we don't know who it is, and people were freaking out. And I'm like, okay, so here's the deal. I said, I can't believe that they didn't send a cease and desist letter. I mean, did you get a cease and desist letter? No, I didn't get it. I'm like, well, you need to immediately contact CBS and get this thing quashed. Apologize, do whatever you have to do, but you need to go ahead and get it done and get something worked out with them, figure out what they find objectionable, and let's remove it so that you can go ahead and get this thing done, because you can't survive this if they want to crush you and destroy you. Well, one thing led to another. We ended up with a lawsuit. You've been following all of that. When I switched from promotion mode into crisis communications mode, I kind of have this deal, and I've had to handle it in this case with other organizations and politicians and governmental bodies and institutions. Once you've got someone you're working with who is in the middle of a crisis, unless there is something that is really, really horribly, horribly wrong and illegal going on, then you want to at least stay with them until they reach a point where they can be on their own and you can back away and someone else can step in and clean up the mess. That's especially true if you're dealing with someone who isn't paying for your service. So I told Alec, I'm with you until we get through this lawsuit and everything, and let's work on getting it settled. If we can get it settled, we can get back into promotion mode, then that's great, because you've got a great idea and everything. Let's go ahead and get it done. Well, one thing led to another. I ended up, kind of having to provide service way beyond anything that I was expecting as a volunteer. And when Axanar Productions finally settled with CBS in February of 2017, I flew out to Los Angeles, went to Valencia, rented a room, got everybody together, Rob, Bill Hunt, Bing Bailey, Diana, Alec, and we all sat down and said, okay, what's the plan? We've got this settlement. We have basically a couple weeks grace period, but we need to have an action plan that will get this thing done. So first things first, what are we going to do? Okay, we know that we can move forward. Let's make a decision. And I think this is all pretty common knowledge. Rob and Bill, who kind of were the director and writer on the project, were in favor of the idea of taking the 30 minutes that we were allowed to make and do the first 30 minutes of Axanar. And Rob's point was, we already have most of the visual effects work done. We already have most of the Klingon costumes, wardrobe, and weapons have been created, and we can make do with the rest, and we can get that done, and at least people can see kind of what we wanted to do. Alec had a compelling argument that he made, which was, look, we know how to do the interview Prelude thing, and we know what the story is, but do we? We know what the story is. Let's just do the next 2 installments in the 4 Years War documentary. And I'm like, okay, we clearly do not have consensus. And I said, Alec, you understand, if you're going to do a mock documentary, this means that you have to have the script done and the movie fleshed out to a point where you can make a documentary about a series of events that never occurred. Okay. So, and you don't have that yet. Well, one thing led to another. The decision was made to go ahead and do the 2 15-minute documentary pieces. I can tell you, Rob and Bill were not happy about it. Rob will tell you to this day that that was the biggest mistake. He never should have backed down, and he should have pressed forward with it. I don't think that would have done anything other than get everyone pissed off, and it would have made my waste of money seem even more wasteful to fly out there and try to figure this thing out.
He might have left the project a little earlier.
Yeah, and he and I have talked about that. I was telling Rob and Alec as of, well, let me back up. There was a deadline after the February thing. I think I'd have to look at my notes, but there was a deadline of let's have the rewritten script done. Bill and Alec were supposed to work on that rewritten script, and I think that was supposed to be done like the beginning of April. We basically said, let's give it 6 weeks and get it done. Those deadlines were all completely shot to hell. There was no way that was going to happen. By May, I was telling Rob and Alec that those guys, Rob, you need to move on, and Alec, for the good of the production, you need to come to terms with the fact that Rob's not going to direct this for you. At that point, I think Alec was already talking about moving and stuff like that. And I'm like, you can't just pick up and move. You need to talk to people. And we walked through all of that. We did a poll of donors to find out what the general feeling was. Alec had pretty much convinced people that a move to Atlanta was the right thing to do. I'm like, I don't think it is. I think you've got all this money invested in this container here. The original plan on your studio dream here was that it wasn't going to be more than 6 months of Axanar, and the rest was supposed to be in production. Well, you've blown through the 6 months, like by a factor of 3. Let's get this thing producing and making. You're not restricted from doing other things, doing other projects or leasing the place out or whatever. There was really no effort made and no interest in doing any of that. So, it was pretty clear to me by May that Alec wasn't really interested in what the advice was that I was giving him. And it was worth everything he was paying for it. So, it was free. So I told him at that point, I'm like, dude, this has gone on way longer than I thought it would. And I need to move on. I've got paying customers I need to take care of. If you need help with something, let me know. Otherwise, I'm out. So I was out by May of 2017 and did not I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Didn't want to announce it. Didn't want to get in the middle of all of that whole mix on the social media side. So I just didn't say anything until Alec continually kind of rebuffed and put off living up to his financial obligation to repay some money that I'd loaned to him. So when it was clear that I was going to get nothing but excuses, then I sued him. And I just told people what happened. That's all. And at that point, then, I was still on the website as a PR person. And, I was still getting media inquiries and everything like that. And I was like, I just stopped forwarding all that stuff to Alec and said, you need to take me off the website and all that kind of thing. by then, when he finally moved to Atlanta, he had Paul Jenkins call me. So that was the first time I met Paul Jenkins. And Paul's like, dude, I don't know what's going on, but Alec is like pissed off at Rob. And he goes, do you think you and I can work this out? I'm like, yeah, dude, just, word to the wise, make sure that you are documenting everything that you do with Alec, because from an organizational standpoint, it will behoove you to make sure that you've got everything documented. Well, we all know kind of how that turned out. So I got to know Paul, and then Paul and I worked on trying to get the whole missing hard drive mystery solved, and the missing asset mystery that where Alec kept accusing Rob of stealing all that stuff. We tried to get all that worked out. It turns out that Alec had access to all the digital assets the entire time. And as we've since found out, I believe, and it's been confirmed by not only Diana, but I think now Alec has even admitted that he actually had those hard drives that he accused Rob of taking. So I don't know. It's like I just kind of shrug my shoulders now and move along. In the meantime, Rob and I have worked on a number of things together. I'm helping him with the Post Geek Singularity, which is the website that we've put together that kind of supports the Robservations podcast, but also a number of other programs that we're working on. And I'm starting to do some work on that as well. So Rob and I have continued to work together, and Paul Jenkins and I work together on some stuff. So, I don't know. I guess
waste of time.
No, I wasn't going to let it be a complete waste of time. I think, Alec is often characterized as some sort of mustache twirling villain. And I think that he certainly has his faults, but I just think that he's, I don't know. He just, I don't really have anything to say about him. I don't really, he just kind of proved himself to me, and I don't care to associate with people like that. I don't work with people like that. I won't work with people like that.
I think that's the biggest thing as well with Alec, is that he doesn't need anyone to speak ill of him or speak well of him or anything like that. He himself is proof in the pudding in what he does and what he has done over the 6 years that I've been covering Axanar. Now, we were speaking in the lead up to this one, Mike. I mentioned a couple of times here in my questions about Alec as a client, Axanar as a client. You've sort of corrected me on that, because a client is someone that pays the bills. What was Axanar to you?
Right. So Axanar was like a fun thing to work on. Okay. Part of the reason that I wanted to help Mark Zicree, and I did, and I still have a good relationship with Mark, even though we don't work together on stuff, But part of the reason I worked with Space Command, and part of the reason I worked with Mark, part of the reason I work with Rob, part of the reason that I'm working with other creators in this space isn't necessarily to make lots and lots of money. There are a couple of them that will pay, occasionally for stuff that I need to do, or money I need to spend on their behalf. But for the most part, I want to get to know the business, and I want to get to know people in the business. I have kids that are interested in the business. I'm interested in helping them. And I have ideas of things that I would like to create and produce. And I'm moving forward with those plans as well. So, in the case of Axanar, I did help PropWorks with a couple things that I was paid for. But in the case of Axanar, I agreed to go ahead and just provide services, and I didn't bill for my time or bill for any out-of-pocket expenses for trips or travel or anything like that. So what's interesting is that at one point early on, I was sent an NDA. I get NDAs all the time from people. I know how to read an NDA. I signed the NDA with Axanar. But the NDA for Axanar was really intended to make sure that there were no leaks about the production, that weren't authorized, that there was no information released about the production that wasn't authorized. It was not a personal non-disparagement NDA kind of thing. And since I was never paid and there was never any consideration given, the NDA is really not applicable with me. But I've honored it in principle. I haven't gone around blabbing about all sorts of stuff with Axanar because, quite honestly, it's like I don't want to have to relive all of that crap. It's a bunch of nonsense, really. Again, Alec's no brainiac. He's no Lex Luthor, as he's often described. He's just a guy who's like he has a pretty lofty picture of what he thinks he's capable of doing, and he's just never really proven to me he's been able to do it.
Was there anything especially frustrating about Alec?
No, not really. Not for me. So I think, again, because I work in a client service business, I very often work with CEOs of businesses who have pretty strong personalities and pretty firmly crafted images of who they are and what they're capable of doing. That I'm able to withstand a tremendous amount of bullshit from people. And it's funny in that I think that one of the reasons I was able to stick with Axanar as long as I was, is that I think Alec actually appreciated that. Unlike a lot of the people that he seems to draw into his orbit, there's nothing there for him to kind of pick away at and use as leverage. And I would tell it, he and I would disagree about lots and lots of things. And he would get very upset with me sometimes, and I would get very upset with him. And, but at the end of the day, we would sit down and it would be like, Alec's like, okay, well, I think I understand where you're coming from here. And it's like, okay, that's great. I remember once we were driving someplace and he told me, he goes like, I said, what is CBS? What is going on here? Why are they so hot after you? And he goes like, I don't think they like me because I'm arrogant. So he realizes how he comes off. He really does. He is more self-aware maybe than he lets on. And he, at least then, was more self-aware. I don't know now because I don't know him now. But he knew when I was talking to him that his ego was a big part of the problem, and that the way that he was talking about CBS and Star Trek in particular was part of the problem, and I think that was made pretty clear to him in his conversations with CBS's attorneys. I mean, I don't think there's any love lost there at all. So,
Well, Mike,
you reap what you sow. You said it, and I completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, we have another deadline for when we're going to see Axanar. It's sort of been this moving ball down the hill over the last 5 years. Supposedly by the end of this year, a little later on this year, do you think that we're going to be seeing Axanar at this point?
I think the thing that people think envision in their head when they think of Axanar is something that is incapable of being produced at this point. I think we have to be really, really honest about what the expectation is. And I think the different groups of people have different expectations of what a finished Axanar project would look like. What was promised in Prelude to Axanar, the 90-minute to 100-minute feature film, will obviously never be done. And I don't think anyone is holding out any sort of hope at all that will be done. The idea that you'll get 2 additional installments of a documentary on par with Prelude to Axanar is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. You don't have the resources or the talent behind the project to be able to pull that off, and you don't have the on-screen talent to be able to pull it off. You just don't have the same people. And you just can't do it. Can something get done? I was talking to Paul Jenkins the other day, and he was giving me a little bit of information about, kind of the struggles that he's facing. And I said to him, dude, I think it's kind of ironic that you literally have gathered together, because he's got all this video evidence of all these YouTube videos that Alex put together talking about what a bad guy Paul Jenkins is, and how Paul is keeping him from making Axanar, which is demonstrably untrue. But regardless, I said, I think it's ironic that you literally have thousands of hours of talking head video from Alec explaining why he can't make 30 minutes of talking head video. Yeah. It's like he could look, if I were in Alec Peters' position and I had to make an Axanar, I'd write a script and I would do the whole thing as a view screen kind of deal and do it by Zoom and get it done in a week and get it off my plate so that I could put my head down and get to work on stuff that really matters. That, of course, presumes that what really matters is producing content that you envision. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Exactly right.
I think again, proof is in the pudding, and I think that Alec is doing exactly what he wants to do, which is being the center of attention and living in the middle of a shitstorm, which I don't know. It's weird.
Exactly right. And I think that's the final point on this first look at where is Axanar now, fast approaching 2,000 days since settlement. It certainly is interesting to catch up, Mike. I really appreciate it. Thanks for beaming in and having a Trekzone conversation. You
bet. Keep me informed as to what you're doing, Matthew. I always like to keep in touch, and I'm always interested in the projects you're working on, bud. Thank you.